Hello and welcome to another episode of TED-IELTS. My name is David Wills and today we're going to be looking at parts of speech. But first, a little something different. As you can see here, this is my website, www.TED-IELTS.com. I'm going to ask you to take a look at it yourselves, and we've got a little announcement down here made about a week ago. And that is to say that my YouTube channel just hit 1,000 subscribers. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody here. We've gone a little over 1,000 subscribers now. We're at 1,076. If you haven't already subscribed, why don't you join the club? So at the bottom of this video, you can hit subscribe and click the notification button. I really appreciate everyone subscribing to this channel. It's a huge help for me, and it inspires me to keep on making great content to help you with your IELTS preparation. You can see some of my popular uploads here. This is by far the most popular one with 18,000 views. Why don't you go check them out later? Another thing, if you're at the website now, this book here, you can click on the right of the screen. It's called Grammar for IELTS Writing. This is a book I wrote it about a year ago. I think it's pretty useful for students. It contains a lot of stuff like this. This is what we're going to be looking at today, the parts of speech. There we go. And you can get a free copy. Just put your email address into the mailing list and click subscribe. I send email every Sunday with some links, little IELTS advice for you. I try not to send the email too often. I don't want you to feel like you're being spammed. But if you feel like it, you can subscribe. If you don't want to, you can always go and click this link. That'll take you to Amazon.com or your local Amazon site, and you can buy a copy. It's available on Kindle if you like. It's quite cheap. The paperback is $7.99 in US dollars. Every copy you buy helps support me and this website. Another thing, on Facebook we have the TED-IELTS group and page, but we also have the IELTS Speaking Partners group. So you can join up and you can go look at all the nice people who are looking for IELTS speaking partners. Remember, if you want to get better at speaking, you need to practice. What we're going to be looking at today is parts of speech, and we're going to do this in a few different ways. Well, we've just had our announcement there. I'm going to start by explaining the different parts of speech in English. Then I have some practice exercises for you to do. We'll have a little review, and I have an exercise you can do for homework if you like. We'll see that at the end of the video. All right, here come the credits. So, parts of speech. Let's get into this. And by the way, please ignore this little sign down here that says activate Windows. I do have a legitimate copy of Windows, but about a year ago, it just came up with this message and I've not been able to fix it ever since. It's really annoying, but don't worry about it. This is a legal copy of Windows, I can assure you. All right, so the parts of speech in English that we have. Some people say there are 8 and some people say that there are 9. I'm going to classify them as 8 today. We've got nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Those are the ones you're probably most familiar with. Then over on the other side, pronoun, preposition, conjunction, and interjection. We'll go through and look at all of these in turn, although maybe not in this exact order. First though, I always like to explain to my students why they're studying something. After all, if you don't have a reason why, then it's just a big waste of time. So the reason why we study parts of speech in English and why I always teach my writing students parts of speech first is that it is very useful to know to help us learn later. In other words, when I'm teaching my students, I often say, why did you write this word? This should be a verb. You've written a noun. And they need to know what a verb and a noun is. Later in my courses, I teach how to build up sentences, and we look at things like subject and object, which would be nouns or pronouns. We have to think about where the adjective goes in relation to the noun, and so on. So knowing the parts of speech is very important for any English learner, and it can help you with your writing skills, but also with all English language skills. And many students, they focus really hard on learning vocabulary. They think this is the magic key to understanding English. It is important, but you need other skills as well. And if you're going to be learning vocabulary, then knowing the part of speech of the word you learn is absolutely essential to being able to use it. Let's begin with the noun then. So a noun we would classify as a person, a place, an idea, or a thing. When we teach children in English-speaking countries, we usually say it is a person, a place, or an animal. But it refers to ideas as well. We can see some examples here, and you can see the last one says here, socialism. So look at the last letters there, I-S-M. This refers to an idea or concept. So socialism, communism, capitalism, Buddhism, Taoism, all these are ideas and they are nouns as well. The person who believes in this is a socialist, a communist, a capitalist, a Buddhist. And we can see that ends in I-S-T. That is also a noun. It refers to a person. You can identify many nouns by looking at the end of the word and seeing these suffixes, ISM, IST, TION, and so on. We can see these sentences here. The moon is bright. So if we have to find the noun, it is of course moon. And this sentence here has two nouns. We're going to move on to pronoun next. And a pronoun is a word that replaces a noun. Well, why would we do that? In English, to be honest, we hate to hear the same word over and over again. If I'm telling a story and I say, the man wakes up, and then the man has breakfast, and then the man goes to the shop, and then the man buys some books, and then the man comes home, it sounds very, very bad. So we would change the man to he, for example. We can see some more examples here. Him, his, her, theirs, we. There should be a comma in here. I made this PPT last year. These sentences, we can see we often have many pronouns in a sentence. Several pronouns in a sentence. We've got 3 here and 3 here. If we look at the second one, he asked her to the dance, but she said no. This might be confusing for some learners of English. You might wonder, who is he? Who is she? Who is her? This has to be made clear in the previous sentence or somewhere prior to this sentence. When you're writing or speaking, this is something you have to get used to. We have many pronouns in English. You can see a list of them here. I will not be teaching you these today, but it is useful to see them and to know what they refer to. I, you, he, she, and so on. Adjectives come up next. An adjective is essentially a word that changes a noun. That's what we most commonly define it as. So we have lots of different kinds of adjectives, and they'll give some more information about a noun. We can see examples here: long, high, red, fast, British, angry. If we're going to describe a person, you might say he is an angry person, or a happy person, or a sad person. These are all people adjectives. We can look at these sentences. The tall man looked at the beautiful woman. So tall and beautiful are our adjectives. We can, of course, change these for other adjectives. The short man looked at the ugly woman, and so forth. Notice in this pattern here, the adjective comes before the noun, adjective before the noun, and so on and so on. This is a common pattern in English, and it is useful to recognize patterns like this. To do this, of course, we need to know our parts of speech quite well. We can classify adjectives into different types. This is often useful for learning, but we're not going to be doing that today. Adverbs come next. An adverb describes a verb in most cases. It can also describe an adjective or another adverb. If we look at these examples here, quickly, silently, cunningly, amusingly, frankly, eventfully, and coyly, we can see how they each have the same ending, the ly, and so on. Not all adverbs have ly endings, but many of them do, and it is a very useful way for identifying adverbs. If we look at these sentences, we can see something different from the previous example. Quickly ran and drove carefully. So adverb, verb, verb, adverb. If we're describing a noun, we say adjective noun, always. But with adverbs and verbs, it can be different, so we need to pay more attention. Adverbs are often answering questions that haven't been asked. How did something happen? But they can also answer questions about frequency, and these ones usually don't have an ly ending. So we have always, never, sometimes, often, rarely, seldom. Verbs are next. So a verb we often say is an action or a doing word, but it can refer to a state of being. In fact, the verb to be is, as I said, a verb. So he is, I am, we are. More examples: think, run, dance, sing, believe. So our sentences like this: he studies English so he can go to America. We can have multiple verbs in a sentence, but it is important that the sentence has at least one verb. If a sentence has no verb, it is probably not a correct sentence grammatically. Conjunction next. Let's look at this part of the word here, junction. Maybe you know this word. Junction is where two roads meet. Likewise, in language, a conjunction joins two words, two groups of words, two clauses. We can remember it that way. We have words like and, but, or, yet. If we look to this first sentence here, they want to go skiing. It's too expensive. These would work well as two short, simple sentences. However, they have a connection. We can contrast them using the word but. They want to go skiing, but it's too expensive. She ate ice cream and cake for dessert. Here we're joining ice cream and cake. We're listing two items. We come around now to the preposition. Preposition in many cases indicates place. Think about a pen. If I asked, where is the pen? You could say it's on the desk, it's under the desk, it's in the desk, it's by the desk. So all of those words are prepositions. But it can also relate to time. He arrived on time, for example. So are words like on, at, in, from, about. These are all prepositions. The keys are on the table. She sat near the door. And finally, we come around to an interjection. This is the least common part of speech, and we don't often use it in writing unless we're doing creative writing. So it is less important for IELTS students, but we'll look at it briefly. An interjection is just a word or a short phrase that expresses emotion. A common one is wow, which indicates surprise or amazement. We also have ouch, which is what an English speaker might say when they were in pain. Let's build up some sentences from these parts of speech. The most basic sentence in English could just be one word, although some people might point out that that's not technically a grammatically good sentence. But if you had an interjection or a verb that conveyed all necessary information, it could function as a sentence. If I see my friend, I might say, hey. Or if I see danger coming, I might tell my friend, run. That would be an interjection or a verb. But to be grammatically correct, we really need two words. We need a noun and a verb, or subject and a verb. In this case, we have Frank reads. But that's not a great sentence. It's not really telling us very much. So we might want to add another noun. He likes computers. Or to go back to the previous example, Frank reads books. Or we could add another verb. Paul was working. In this case, was changes the tense into the past. We know that this is something that happened in the past. Adverbs and adjectives, this should say adjectives here, my mistake, can alter verbs and nouns, as we saw. So we can start making more interesting sentences. Sally speaks English well. So in this case, you can see the adverb refers to the verb speak. How did she speak? She spoke well. In this case, our noun is being altered by the adjective. Peter has nice parents, or strict parents, or kind parents. So the adjective describes the noun. Prepositions throw in some more information, so we can talk about more complicated ideas. Please pay attention to this note here. A determiner or article is another part of speech, but is sometimes considered an adjective. I did not cover them here today. I'm including them as a kind of adjective, but you may see some people refer to 9 parts of speech and use the article. Conjunctions can allow us to add multiple clauses to a sentence. So instead of just having an essay made up of simple sentences, we can use the words but and to build up multiple clauses. And finally, here we can see we have all the parts of speech making up a much more interesting sentence. To be honest, we don't often use the interjection, and it does sound a little strange here, but it occurs in spoken language and it can occur in written language. Pay attention to the words that you see. Sometimes they're familiar, but they may have different parts of speech. When you look up a word in a dictionary, you will see the parts of speech, and so often it will list multiple parts. You can see some examples here, such as work. My work is easy, or I go to work. That is a noun, but it can also be a verb. I work in London. I work as a teacher. Next, I'm going to give you a little test. Let's make this an interactive lesson. You can pause the video now, and I would like you to try to write or at least think of the answers in these blank spaces over on the right of your screen. You should look at these examples example 1 and example 2. And think of the bold italic words such as ouch and hi. What part of speech are they? Pause the video and then I will tell you the answers. Here are your answers. So ouch, as we saw, is an interjection. And, or, conjunctions. She, his, are pronouns, and so on. So now that I have explained the different parts of speech, it's time to do a little bit of practice. I think this is important because it can help you to remember what you've learned better. The first thing I'm going to do is show you an excerpt from a novel that I really love. In fact, when I was a young man, this was absolutely my favorite book. It's called The Rum Diary by Hunter S. Thompson. I'm going to show you this passage. It is 129 words. And see if you can label it with the 8 parts of speech. I know this is a lot of work, but why don't you pause the video for a few minutes and try to label as many of these words as you can. What are the verbs? What are the nouns? And so on. So here are the answers. I thought I would make this as colorful as possible. So I'm going to highlight the nouns and adjectives and verbs in different colors so you can see them more easily. So the nouns are in yellows and the adjectives are in green. Remember that an adjective describes a noun. It adds more information. Remember also that we're including articles like a, and the as adjectives, so they appear like this. If we look here, we can see we have adjective, noun, adjective, noun. We have adjective, noun, adjective, noun, adjective, noun. We can see these patterns emerging. When we see adverbs and verbs, it's a little more complicated. And we can see the relationship. Sometimes the adverb appears before the verb and sometimes after. We can see the common themes of preposition appearing quite rarely, as well as pronouns being less common than nouns. We can see that there are far more adjectives included here than adverbs. We just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 adverbs, but there are so many adjectives. We should add a few adverbs to our language to make it more informative, but many writers think that too many adverbs are not good for the prose. Next, I would like you to look at this table here. So when we learn the parts of speech, it can help us in many different ways. It can help us to form better sentences when we are writing, and it can also help us to understand more when we are reading. If we look here, we can see there are 4 parts of speech: noun, verb, adjective, and adverb. I've filled in the nouns on this side of the table. If you know a noun and you learn it in your vocabulary study, you can often figure out the verb and adjective and adverb form. Let's say you are studying vocabulary and you learn 10 nouns. It is possible you've actually just learned 40 new words instead of 10, because you may be able to change these words into verb, adjective, and adverb as well. However, not all nouns, of course, can be changed into verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Why don't you pause the video for a few minutes and try to fill in this table. There are some words which cannot be changed into all parts of speech, so there will be 3 blank spaces remaining. So here are your answers. We can see there are 3 blank spaces here, here, and here. So introduction becomes introduce, of course, and the adjective form is introductory. You can often see adjectives taking the O-R-Y ending. Likewise, you often see nouns ending in T-I-O-N. This is a good way of recognizing parts of speech. Intelligence does not have a verb form. Some related verbs include to learn, to know, to understand, to figure out. But it does have an adjective form. It's intelligent, and the adverb just adds ly to the end, intelligently. The noun delight is the same as the verb delight, although the verb is a little less common. The adjective takes another common adjective ending, ful, and we just add another ly there. You'll see this is pretty much the common way of making an adverb. I'm going to ask you now at this point in the video, if you found it at all useful, to please go down and click the like button below. It is a huge help for a YouTuber like myself. Let's go on to our next exercise. And we're going to practice changing some words here. So when we're learning parts of speech, one thing we can do is to practice changing a part of speech to another of the same kind of part of speech. Let's look at this sentence. The big brown horse was really fast. So we have an article, adjective, adjective, noun, verb, adverb, adjective. So we want to change those as much as possible in this exercise to the same part of speech, but with a different word. I'm going to keep the and was the same, although we could change this to a and is if we really wanted. So big, little, brown, white. So we're changing the size adjective, the color adjective, and here I'm going to just change this animal noun from horse to cow. We'll change really to quite and fast to slow. Why don't you pause the video and try doing the same with these 5 sentences. And by the way, when you're using Microsoft Word and you get the red line underneath, it is recommending you change to the American spelling. My computer is in American English, but I'm from the UK, so I write in British English. So here are some possibilities if you wanted to change these sentences. We could change day to month and Friday to July, for example. Maybe you could change suitcase to bag. We could change smelly, this is an adjective, to beautiful, new, books. We could change in, that's a preposition to on, kitchen to street. You could say old becomes young. We'd have to change this to a young boy playing football, and so on and so on. This is a good exercise to show that you understand the parts of speech, that you can recognize them easily, and then change them. If you're able to do this, then you are able to improve your own writing by increasing the quality of vocabulary and the accuracy of vocabulary that you are using. So I mentioned earlier, I'm going to give you some homework, a task to do. So here's an assignment. I would like you to write these sentences according to my instructions. You can then type them into the comment section below, and I will let you know if the sentences you have written are correct or incorrect. And if they are incorrect, I will change them for you. All right, thank you so much to everyone. Really happy to have hit 1,000 subscribers. I hope my videos are useful for you. Let me know what you thought of this one and stick your answers down below if you want to do that writing task. Please click like if you haven't done already, and I will see you again next week for another episode of TED-IELTS.